Hello, you all. We welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Once again with your hosts, myself, Bernhard Ganther, and my wife, Laura Matsu. And this will be a very timely, very interesting topic on UFO disclosure, false light, and spiritual warfare. And I was going to say also right off the bat, even if you're not interested in UFOs and aliens and all this kind of fringe topic, this is something that is affecting all of us and is going to affect all of us because this topic ties into many other aspects and occurrences that are happening in our world and during this time of transition. So in this podcast, we will make some of those connections. It's very interesting that the official UFO disclosure machine has now moved into its next phase. And as many of you maybe already know or witnessed, on May 8th, the Department of War, official government organization, launched the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters, or PURSUE, releasing the first batch of declassified UAP files, and which is also being presented as a historic transparency effort. Literally, that was the words written on the Twitter or X page of the official Department of War account. By the way, UAP stands for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. Previously, it stood for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, but it was updated to include objects in water and space. And before that, it was just simply UFOs, unidentified flying object, as I remembered it. I don't even know when people started to calling it more UAPs. But just to set the ground here of this official start of disclosure, the Department of War stated that this is a part of a government-wide effort, also supported by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, to identify, declassify, and publicly release unresolved UAP-related records and historical documents across the federal government. And it will also said that these new materials will be released on a rolling basis every few weeks. And then very fascinatingly, to make this thing, it's becoming really surreal, especially for somebody like me who has researched this topic for many years, for decades, made a film about it. I'll talk about this shortly. But Trump, just a few days ago, posted an AI-generated image of himself with a tall gray alien.
In handcuffs.
In handcuffs, yeah. Yeah, you can of course see it as trolling or a joke, but really, the fact that the highest political office, the president in this country, is now playing with this alien image, it's something to be said there. It's very interesting. And also very interesting, I just saw this, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, mainstream media, especially Fox News, recently is now openly discussing alleged alien species, specifically 4 types of physical aliens, as they call them, the Greys, Nordics, Insectoids, and Reptilians, literally mentioned in front of millions of viewers on mainstream news. It's very surreal, again, for people who have researched this topic for many years, because it sounded most absurd to most people just even a few years ago. Now it increasingly is being normalized with this public conversation. Very interesting. And then even very interesting, Neil deGrasse Tyson, this mainstream astrophysicist who was very highly skeptical of UFOs and, questioning this whole thing and debunking it, basically took a 180-degree turn and is now speaking more openly about the possibility of disclosure and suggesting that the public may be more ready for the truth than before, and, citing all these whistleblowers and high-ranking officials talking about it. I have to say what these whistleblowers talked about, quote-unquote high-ranking officials, they have talked about this for decades already. But now, all of a sudden, it's being acknowledged by official federal government sources. So something is clearly changing in the collective field here. And again, this official start of disclosure has been called historic. And in one sense, it is. But I would argue or say or lay out the whole podcast here that is historic, but not for the reason most people assume. First of all, yes, there's indeed a UFO or UAP cover-up, but I don't think the real cover-up is simply about hidden UFOs, crafts, crash retrievals, reverse engineered technology, or biological aliens from another planet and all of this. Yes, there may be pieces to the puzzle, so to speak, and I'm definitely not dismissing the physical aspect of the phenomenon, right? There may be craft-like manifestation, physiological effects, encounters, and so forth. But the deeper reality of this phenomenon, as I've talked about and written about for many years, cannot be simply understood through a purely physical nuts and bolts lens. That framework is way too small, and it's more a reflection of our materialistic age, right? Where everything must be explained through technology, biology, psychology, or just government secrecy. But this UFO phenomena or UAP phenomena points way beyond that. It opens into a more hyperdimensional, occult, and spiritual reality, or what some people call interdimensional. And it requires a very different kind of discernment. And again, this is also why this topic affects everyone, even those who have no interest in UFOs. And even those who think the whole disclosure movement is just another distraction, which on some level, yes, it may be. And it can become a distraction. Many people go down the rabbit hole of the UFO alien topic and all of this, which we'll talk about as well, while avoiding the deeper inner work. But again, that doesn't mean that this phenomenon itself is not irrelevant. It's very fascinating, this narrative forming around UFOs, aliens, non-human intelligence, and hidden technology are already shaping the collective imagination. It's affecting us. It's almost a reflection of something else. Coming out of the hiding, so to speak. All of this influences us in terms of how we understand reality, human origins, even the future of humanity, spiritual teaching, spiritual authority, technology, and all of this. So even if you never follow UFO news, these narratives will increasingly enter the culture through media, politics, and so forth. Entertainment, it definitely ties into AI, transhumanism, and the larger battle of a human consciousness. So the issue is really not whether someone is into UFOs or not, but what worldview is being installed through this emerging UFO narrative. So in this episode, we will examine the UFO disclosure from a spiritual, esoteric, and occult perspective. We'll look at why the conventional mainstream view and even much of this, alternative UFO disclosure community are still trapped in a very limited materialistic framework. We will explore what UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial, and so-called alien beings may represent beyond the usual aliens from another planet narrative. We will also look very interestingly at the possible emergence of an alien religion and counterfeit spirituality and how this ties into false light deception, what I call a New Age astral circus, manipulation, AI transhumanism, and really the battle for the future of human consciousness. And in the second hour, we also go deeper, as always for members, into more the esoteric context behind this disclosure moment. We will look at UFO disclosure as a symptom also of this time of transition at the end of this Kali Yuga. We've talked about this before, the purification process, epikurosis, and what some esoteric tradition called the unveiling of the heaven of the gods. Very interestingly. It also ties into Pluto and Aquarius. We will explore the externalization of the spiritual hierarchy, the danger of a false hierarchy, and imposter beings, how positive divine forces truly act, and how hostile forces can masquerade as divine forces, why knowing your own psyche is essential for spiritual warfare. And again, here we go beyond even the UFO disclosure, but it ties directly into it, into the larger context of the unveiling. As I've said many times, the spiritual realities will become more perceptible, will be more interacting with humanity, and why this discernment or differentiation is very, very important in the spiritual battle during this time of transition. So this is really the deeper foundation of spiritual warfare and what it means to be a spiritual warrior during these times. Because ultimately, we're living through an intensifying time of transition, and psycho-spiritual discernment is becoming more than essential. As the collective field grows more polarized and spiritually challenging, we need to learn how to discern what is truly ours, what comes from the collective field, what may be spiritual interference, thought forms, or our own internal parts, and what is actually genuine divine guidance. So this is one of the reasons I was very inspired to create my 10-week program, Mastering Spiritual Warfare, Discerning the Unseen Forces and the Path to Embodied Sovereignty. This is not about living in fear of unseen forces and entities and all that. It's about becoming more conscious and ultimately grounded and protected and available to the divine, for divine will and our own purpose for being here to align with who we truly are during this magnificent time, because that's how I truly see it in the evolution of consciousness. So the next round will start July 15th until September 20th. I'll be leading the core teachings, and Laura will be also there as a guest teacher. And the course is limited to 40 participants, and this will be the only round offered this year. There's still an early bird enrollment available until May 31st, and you can learn more about it on masteringspiritualwarfare.com. All of that is listed there. Frequently answered questions, all the topics we get into in depth. So go to the website masteringspiritualwarfare.com. All right, let's dive into it. So just for a little background and context, as some of you listeners may know if you've followed my work for a long time, I already researched the UFO and this alien phenomena in depth many years ago. Started researching in the 90s to the 2000s, and that resulted then in my 2010 article, UFOs, Aliens, and the Question of Contact, and later the 2011 documentary produced under the same name. And you can find both the film and the article on my website, veilofreality.com. So definitely, I'm not claiming to have figured it out all, or that I know it all. But back then, already the central issue was for me not simply whether UFOs are real or whether aliens exist, but or whether even the government has been hiding information. The deeper issue was always the actual phenomenon itself. What are we actually dealing with? What kind of intelligence is behind it? Why is this UFO field filled with so much contradiction, absurdity? There's a lot of disinformation. It's like a swarm. That's the analogy I used back then. Psychological manipulation, counterintelligence programs, cult-like beliefs, all of this. This goes all across the board. So back then I already came to the insight that there's a hyperdimensional occult and spiritual aspect to the phenomenon. Also through my own experiences with some of these forces. So the standard ET visitation from another planet narrative is way too narrow, and I feel in many cases deceptive. Now, I have a whole resource list mentioned in the article in my film, which is based on. Guys can check it out. But one of the researchers who really I highly recommend to get into and read his book is John A. Keel. And I featured him or presented some of his work in my article, especially his book, Operation Trojan Horse. So that came out like decades ago, and he was one of the few researchers who already saw through the oversimplified extraterrestrial hypothesis. He understood that the UFOs overlap with religion, occultism, demonology, psychic phenomena, mythology, folklore, all of that in the unseen world. As a matter of fact, there has been a very interesting film based on one of his books, The Mothman Prophecies. A very fascinating film based on true events that he researched. I think it was even with the actor Richard Gere. I highly recommend checking out that film if you haven't seen it yet. But even in this book, Keel wrote that, history, psychiatry, religion, and the occult were far more important to understanding the UFO phenomena than just any accounts of sightings and or aerial anomalies, right? So having a deeper framework, really a psycho-spiritual framework. So Keel and others helped me then to see the UFO phenomena, that it cannot be reduced just to sightings, military encounters, all the stuff we are dealing with. It's not now being disclosed, so to speak, even crash retrieval, hidden technology, which is the issue in itself. But the deeper issue is whether the framework through which it discloses is presented is already misleading. That's why I also think that disclosure is not what most people think it is. Because many people look at UFO disclosure as some sort of political, technological, military, or extraterrestrial event, right? But again, this phenomena is hyperdimensional, paraphysical, and occult, or even psychic and spiritual in nature. And that is completely dismissed in this official disclosure frame, which is already too small, partly based because of this extreme materialistic worldview we live in, right? So it keeps the subject inside categories of, just basic technology, biology, psychology, and all of this. And also, I make this case in my work already 20 years ago, that for decades we have to understand how humanity has been prepared for this very moment through Hollywood movies, controlled leaks, intelligence-linked disclosure movements, whistleblower narratives, alien contact stories, all kinds of new age challenging, and always the promise that hidden knowledge about UFOs, aliens, and advanced technology would one day be revealed, right? I remember even back then in 2001 when I came across Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. I was psyched about it. It was amazing. I was like, oh my God, the truth is being revealed. We're getting in a 0.3 energy, all this advanced technology from the aliens. And I bought all his DVDs back then, tried to give it to my friends. But then over the years, I saw there's something else happen. This guy might not be who he appears to be. And I felt a lot of disinformation coming through and too much focus on like technology as the savior, so to speak, right? And now all of a sudden, so what I'm trying to say is we need to become aware how we have been conditioned over decades to have a certain view or framework of this ET UFO topic. And by the way, it is no coincidence that Steven Spielberg's next big movie, Disclosure, Day of Disclosure, I forgot something about Disclosure, will be released just in a few weeks in June. I don't think that's any coincidence at all. He had big impact with Encounters of the Fifth Kind, famous film, on E.T. the Extraterrestrial. So all this, the culture and society is being shaped that way to have a certain idea of this topic.
It's called Disclosure Day.
Disclosure Day.
On June 12th. Very interesting, because what I'll talk about later in the podcast is very close to when the Uranus-Pluto will trine exact, which I think is Pluto-Uranus will trine exact. So that's really what I'm going to focus on in the second hour, how all of this kind of alien stuff has been seeded since the first Pluto-Uranus conjunction in the 60s.
Okay, excellent. That's when it also came on the forefront, the 50s, 60s. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So again, the deeper question is, what is the story you have been guided into? What image of reality is being formed in the collective? And what people are being prepared to believe, fear, trust, worship, or consent to? Right? That's really what it comes down to. That's why, again, I don't see disclosure as a neutral act of the truth finally being revealed. It looks more like the formalization of a narrative. That's the way I truly see it, and also made the point, again, in my UFO documentary, which stands the test of time, I would argue as well. So the issue is not only what is being disclosed, but how the disclosure is being framed. What is emphasized, what is omitted, what worldview is being installed, right? And what kind of relationship humanity is being prepared to enter with non-human intelligences, unseen forces, and so forth, which I don't doubt that they exist. Obviously, they do exist. It's part of what I've writing and talking about for many years. So I'm also, again, not denying the physical side of the UFO event, right? It's not black and white for me. But the physical effects don't, automatically prove a purely physical origin. Phenomenon can have affect the physical world without originating strictly from the physical world. For the most part, it can be a symptom of a non-physical, spiritual, interdimensional technology even. That's also why this whole advanced alien technology narrative is so deceptive. I feel a lot of people, it's like the dangling carrot. I remember Stephen Greer for nearly 30 years, like we're close to getting advanced alien technology, 0-point energy that will help us humans, will, bring us to the next evolutionary step, will save the world, so to speak. There's a savior narrative behind all of that as well. But what people may be conditioned or interpret as advanced alien technology or extraterrestrial technology may be actually only the outer appearance of much deeper occult phenomenon, and not proof that benevolent ETs are flying here from distant planets to upgrade humanity and give us free energy technology. Also, I've made that point in the past as well, some of it may also be highly advanced human technology they're way ahead of what we see in the mainstream, developed through black budget programs, hidden research. That is then later presented to the public as quote-unquote alien technology with a certain agenda behind it, right? Again, John Keel argued that the scope, frequency, and distribution of UFO sightings make the popular extraterrestrial hypothesis untenable. That's a direct quote. He also suggested that many UFO manifestations appear to be variations of much older demonological and occult phenomena. It's almost inseparable. So again, that doesn't mean that every sighting, all alien forces, these beings are demonic, which I think some, especially nowadays, dogmatic Christians oversimplify this whole topic by reducing that everything to demons, or basically everything that's non-Christian is demonic.
Yeah.
So that's way oversimplified.
And also, all of a sudden, everyone has the psychic abilities to be able to differentiate between what is a demon and what isn't. So it's very fascinating, this whole phenomenon.
All of a sudden, people are experts in discernment.
Everything I don't understand is demonic, is really the catchphrase of that kind of group.
Exactly. So, again, this is not just about lights in the sky or secret government programs. It touches the deeper question of what reality is, what forces influences us, all of us, without exception. What kind of beings or intelligence maybe have been interacting with us from unseen realms, using under different names, mythologies and masks and so forth. And again, what people call aliens may very strongly overlap with what ancient traditions described as gods, spirits, also demons, yes, devas, angels, trickster beings, forces from other planes of creation, a spiritual hierarchy. So again, I'm not saying that they're all the same, but there's some definite overlap, right, that is too significant to ignore. And again, as John Keel wrote about it, I made the case as well, that the form, the way these forces manifest beings, entities, also changes according to the zeitgeist or the consciousness of the age. So, for example, in ancient religious age, it may appear through gods, angels, demons, spirits, or interpreted as such, right? In a mythological age, it may appear through trickster beings, fairies, devas, supernatural visitors. And now we're in the technological age, and it appears through extraterrestrials, spacecraft, genetic experimentation, hidden technology, and advanced civilization, a very technological framework to which they appear.
Well, that's pretty well known that, what Carl Jung would call the archetypes, or would be entities or spiritual beings, adjust themselves not only to the spirit of the times that they live in, but also the culture that they're manifesting in. So even recently I was reading in Tibetan Book of the Dead, this whole idea of the Bardo realm and all the beings that appear in there will not actually appear as the Tibetans described it for Westerners. So it all changes depending on the culture that it's happening in. So it adjusts actually almost to the collective cultural imagination of the individual. So yes. It's all, it's all going to change. Like one person may have a powerful experience, see Buddha, and the other will see a bodhisattva or
Christ,
or any other of the other Shiva, whatever, right?
Yeah, very true. And obviously in our materialistic culture, we interpret many of these forces through a technological lens.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
so the heavens become outer space, the gods become extraterrestrials, and revelation becomes disclosure, right? And salvation, the religious savior program, becomes rescue by advanced beings or technological savior evolution. That ties also directly this whole UFO phenomena into AI and transhumanism, which we'll explore more as well. So again, that's why I believe this whole UFO disclosure is not at all what most people think it is. I think it's, would say this topic in itself is one of the most powerful entry points into the unseen, as we now present it on a mainstream level. But most people enter that gateway, so to speak, or into this UFO topic, either of complete denial, they ignore, they think still it's nonsense, distraction, but many through fascination, curiosity, but also ideology, science fiction. They have a spiritual fantasy or whatever. But again, without a deeper spiritual occult, and especially psycho-spiritual framework and discernment, we will not recognize what we're actually dealing with and what we're opening ourselves up to. So now let's dive a little bit deeper. I want to just quote something again from Keel, from his very profound book, Operation Trojan Horse. he says, quote, they, UFOs, these sightings, all of that, they're like Trojan horses descending into our forests and farm fields, promising salvation and offering us the splendor of some great super civilization in the sky. Do the ultra-terrestrials really care about us? There's much disturbing evidence that they don't. They care only to the extent that we can fulfill our enigmatic use to them. So here's very important, the discernment, because it ties into the formation of what I call a possible alien religion. And I don't mean alien religion in terms of there's a church and priesthood, robes, temples, and all of that. What I'm saying about what we may be dealing with a new installment of a creation myth, right? It tells humanity where we came from, who created us, what our future is, and what kind of authority we should trust, even spiritual authority. It can install a new origin story, in other words, right? It funnels attention towards alien technology as humanity's savior. It gets people like welcoming what they should be questioning. And it's very important, and we go deeper on this in the second hour, but in this dark age, at the end of this Kali Yuga, most of humanity are completely disconnected from their true self, true essence, from the inner guidance, from God, the divine, even from the deeper spiritual guides. They become easily fed up with mainstream religion, suspicious of official history, lost, confused, all of this, very spiritually hungry, and all of a sudden this alien narrative fills that vacuum, provides that, food for that hunger, so to speak. It offers a ready-made mythology for a population that craves meaning and is also unwilling to engage in the deeper grounded inner psycho-spiritual work, right? It gives people something out there, be it to blame or worship, and a fantasy that alien technology will save us and uplift humanity, right? It can, but instead of leading people back to the divine, to our inner purification, to embodied soul work, our inner guidance, our inner authority, to truly to God, it can redirect this spiritual longing towards extraterrestrial authorities, all kinds of galactic hierarchies, special missions, DNA upgrades, ascension mechanics, and all of this, which we see a lot in the New Age, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, even lately I've noticed like this Elizabeth April woman, she's been a really big person in this kind of, I'm in contact with the Galactic Federation of Light. She's even getting on more mainstream podcasts, and there's this whole industry of people perpetuating these ideas, and it seems like she really believes what she's saying. That's the fascinating
thing. Many people do.
She's very convinced, and she's very convincing because she really does believe what she's saying, right?
Yeah. Most people do. Most people, I say similar. Just to be real quick, 20 years ago during my article, I made the point too. We have been genetically manipulated by alien beings. They've interfered with our DNA and all of this, something out there. And also have to give props to Gigi Jung. She made a really propelling case, and I changed my own tune, so to speak, not influenced necessarily by her, but confirmed that what we are seeing now, the bigger picture, is the creation of a new origin myth. All of a sudden, alien beings created us, right? These gods from the skies have genetically engineered us. Like we now genetically engineer human beings, so we become the gods as well, right? It all ties into this weird transhumanism, AI age as well. And this whole New Age astral circus, the Galactic Federation of Light, is also very part of this deception, right? Because it's all about cosmic meaning without this inner purification, right? Again, or inner work. It's like, it's a world of all kinds of savior aliens, galactic federations, alien councils, the alliance, starseed identities, ascension mechanics, DNA activations, frequency upgrade, downloads, channel ET messages, right? And the whole belief that advanced beings or hidden alien technology will save humanity, right? It can also, by the way, that's where deception comes in. It doesn't deny spirituality. It can use very spiritual language, love, unity, healing. So all of this, very deceptive. I call this hyperdimensional disinformation where truth is mixed with lies. I've mentioned even Bashar, very popular channeled material, who claims himself to be like a gray alien, very deceptive channeled material. I talked about this 20 years ago already, right? And that's coming, like you said, out more and more, especially on social media. Everybody's channeling alien beings all of a sudden. Don't question what they're tapping into.
Yeah.
Some just make it up. But some people, like you said, may be in contact with something, but completely believe it, can easily be deceived because, oh, I'm so special, I'm receiving this message, or feel good emotions mistaken for resonance, and all of this.
Yeah, and it tends to center around this idea we talked in our spiritual narcissism podcast, where there's a sense of inflation. Like, I'm special, the Galactic Federation are contacting me to send this very important message, and you need to listen to me because I have access to this special information that you can only hear through me from them speaking to me.
Exactly. This is huge. That's why, you have some of these channels have a cult following, and it's very seductive. Because this whole New Age astral circus offers kind of counterfeit spirituality. Again, right? Who are very spiritually hungry, but not grounded enough to discern what is they're actually opening themselves up to. Because the so-called alien contact may be something very, very different. It may be more an embedded spiritual hierarchy, misperceived as extraterrestrial visitors, Galactic Federation of Light, with very deceptive shape-shifting forces posing as aliens and posing as benevolent beings. Because this is really what it comes down to. Spiritual warfare, understanding the spiritual realms, is especially understanding how hostile negative forces, adverse forces, can easily represent themselves as divine forces or positive aliens, and then create what the occult tradition calls a trap of agreement. They can take on whatever appearance is needed to create, to get that consent, so to speak, right? To pull people into consent through projection, visual thinking, or the promise, like you said, of special knowledge, special downloads, and special identity, and special powers, and all of this. So this whole quote-unquote alien religion gives people a new mythology, a mission, an identity, a cosmic drama, right? Which they get very, very identified with. But it's really important to understand how this so-called alien religion concept, as I just talked about, this emergence we have been conditioned for decades now, ties into what I call the New Age astral circus, or what David Hawkins also called the New Age astral circus. And Sri Aurobindo in his own work warned about this danger as well. He said, very fascinating, when people are very impatient in the search for truth, in the search for realization and enlightening and awakening, and then they don't become sincere in the inner work and very spiritually hungry, so they look for shortcuts to the marvelous or magical, as he said, and then they become easy prey for deceptive forces. And we see this a lot in the so-called New Age. And the esoteric tradition also called this lure, or called this the lure of mysticism of phenomena, right? And that's the lure of secret cosmic knowledge about, again, galactic federations, alien agendas, ET races, ascension timelines, and all kinds of hidden cosmic histories, right, that are often wrapped in very mysterious language that can seem very profound and spiritually advanced. But often these teachings offer this so-called shortcut to awakening through, like you mentioned, again, special codes, templates, DNA activations, upgrades, complex ascension mechanics, but without really any grounded psycho-spiritual inner work.
And they'll speak this like complicated language that will make you think that they know something that you don't, when it's really just this kind of like gibberish.
It's gibberish, yes. Gibberish is what it is, but it
and then people are like, wow, I don't... But if people don't understand, they're like, wow, I don't understand, but it sounds very fascinating. It lures them in through that fascination.
Because the idea is, it kind of gives almost... Because it sounds so complicated, it must be true.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And then the person who's delivering it will usually be so confident because they probably believe in it themselves, right?
Yeah. And also, these things, what people engage in, can actually produce temporary effects, like a sense of uplift, meaning, expansion, right? But these experiences do not create a true foundation, what's called in esoteric traditions a false foundation, which is even harder to break than somebody who doesn't claim to be awake, right? So again, we know this. All of this leads to spiritual bypassing. Inflation, a false sense of awakening, grandiosity, spiritual narcissism, right? The illusion of being more evolved or chosen than others, or even worse. And that's the danger we are going to experience now in these coming times as the veil is thinning, as these forces become more, reveal themselves more. Many of these teachings open people to so-called higher dimensional communication without proper discernment or any real understanding of especially how Luciferic forces and other entities mimic the light. And this makes the sincere seeker very vulnerable to astral hijacking, manipulation, and all kinds of deceptive forms of interference. And again, Boris Muravyev in his work in Gnosis, based on the esoteric Christian tradition, warned that it's possible to obtain so-called esoteric results that are impure, false, and transitory. And he connected that to the vast realm of what he called mysticism of phenomena, which we see a lot in the so-called New Age channeling arena. So again, that also can happen when people want, especially spiritual experiences, without the inner work, without the inner purification, right? They want all the secret knowledge without their own effort, without humility, just being told by somebody who is apparently in contact with something, right? So basically really awakening without any inner work. And again, I've written about this before, quoted many masters about this. Sri Aurobindo warned that no trust can be placed merely on beauty and radiance. He was actually asked directly about alien beings. And then he mentioned that no trust can be placed merely on beauty, radiance, bliss, or captivating appearance. There are beings of the lower planes that can have a captivating beauty and can even give an ananda, which is bliss, like a sense of ecstasy or love. But as he said, that is not of the highest. That serves as a deception, as a temptation. And through that lure, they can take the seeker away, divert them from the path altogether. So that's all warned about in the esoteric traditions. So that's why we need real occult discernment, inner differentiation. And again, here, David Hawkins fascinatingly wrote about this in his book, The Eye of the Eye. He described that many so-called spiritual teachings as coming from the astral realm of consciousness are not to be trusted, right? They can even be very seductive, fascinating, and pleasurable, as he said, full of interesting teachings, but they actually do not treat to true enlightenment and awakening. And he called it the astral circus, with all kinds of endless masters, ETs, spaceships, UFOs, prophecies, agendas, and all of this, which can look spiritual, can feel meaningful, but can produce some sort of counterfeit spiritual experience, but not the real experience.
And I'm sure he saw a lot of that living in Sedona.
Yes, he was directly talking about this.
It's a really huge aspect of the kind of spiritual scene here.
And then we have this, because we are this dark age of the Kali Yuga and there's spiritual hunger, there's an awakening impulse for sure. But there's also a spiritual vacuum, as Rudolf Steiner talked about it, not an integrated true spiritual aspiration with true sincerity and a grounded approach. And this vacuum, this distortion is what hostile beings, forces exploit very easily. And especially when people are already disconnected from the true self, right? All of that, this whole astral circus becomes very attractive and are not willing to do the more grounded inner work on a very grounded psycho-spiritual level. And again, this ties all into spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare is not just about obvious darkness, but really more about the deception through the light. This is the most important aspect, that discernment. And this is not an intellectual discernment. Because if you don't know yourself, your inner parts, your shadow parts, your conditioning, your wishful thinking, your tendency for grandiosity, narcissism, inflation, deflation, subpersonality parts, inner child parts, all of that, then you will not be able to discern the spiritual realm. And
I think a lot of people, they don't seem to want to, they like the idea of awakening, but they actually don't want to do the work, which takes place in everyday life. And it's not easy. It creates friction. You have to work against your conditioned patterns and your wounded self. And you actually have to feel very uncomfortable emotions sometimes and have this awareness all the time. And I think many people like this idea of awakening or, yes, individuation. But then when it comes down to the work of actually doing it in their everyday life, they actually can't generate the will to work through the friction to do it. Yes. So they love these shortcuts. The shortcuts and these kind of false kind of light gurus and whatnot, they become very seductive to people who are lazy in that sense.
Yeah. And then especially in the age of social media and short attention span.
Exactly.
Like tell me 10 how to do a list.
Exactly. Right.
So going a bit further that and expanding out a bit about, why even modern spirituality is unprepared for this whole disclosure, for this unveiling. It's very important to understand. And I was really inspired recently listening to a talk by Robert Moore. And that's from 20 or 30 years ago. How already talked about that we have a so-called flatland spirituality nowadays, which is mostly focused on just, inner peace, mindfulness, inner equanimity, and just no conflict, and just, taking care of your emotions, love, light, and just, and this has its place, absolutely, right? The kind of spirituality that's presented in Oprah, for example, Adyashanti, Eckhart Tolle, and these are great teachers. I quoted them before, right? But it's very flat. It's very minimized. And what modern, quote unquote, minimized spirituality is almost like an Apple store misses or lacks is three major things which were inherent in all authentic esoteric traditions in the past, when people were even more in relationship with the spiritual realms and spiritual forces. Number one, a real cosmology of spiritual hierarchies, right? There are different levels, different planes of creation, realms, beings, forces, and hierarchies of consciousness. There are benevolent forces, guiding forces, absolute, angelic beings, but also deceptive, hostile, and parasitic forces. And all complete esoteric teachings showed both. Another one is sound understanding of evil, right? Most people avoid evil. They're afraid of it. They deny it. They think we need to focus on the light. They think even evil doesn't exist because we're all one, spiritual bypassing, right? The non-duality bypass. Or people then get into doom and gloom, project evil externally on everyone outside themselves, never facing it within themselves. But again, as Sri Aurobindo, Rudolf Steiner both talked about, we need to tackle the problem of evil, because true spiritual evolution without understanding the cosmic teaching function of evil is incomplete and will never, and without it, we will actually not, quote unquote, defeat evil, but are leaving ourselves more open to manipulation or prone to projection, right? And again, evil doesn't act as obvious as we think it does, but most often to the deceptive veil of light, as Rumi talked about. And third, what's also left out nowadays, controversial topic, which David Hawkins brought back, understanding of different levels of consciousness within humanity, that we're not equal on a soul level. Yeah, we're equal in front of God and whatnot, but on a soul level, there are vast different levels of consciousness, vast different levels of soul development, vast different levels of soul lessons, right? And this has nothing to do with race, gender, class, culture, or nationality. It doesn't even have to do with your upbringing. It's about soul lessons, soul evolution, and development over lifetimes. So if these three pillars are removed, right, a real understanding of a cosmology, of a spiritual hierarchy, the planes of creation, a sound understanding of evil, especially in this dark age of the Kali Yuga, and understanding different levels of consciousness within humanity, then we are easily subjected to manipulation and control. And I would argue a lot of this stuff has been taken out or suppressed or avoided or denied on purpose, because then it's easier to control a population on that level. So again, understanding this helps the seeker to understand what is being contacted, what we are in touch with, what is coming through us, what is being opened, what is being projected, and so forth. Right? And what we can accept as part of our being, what we need to reject. So, and I've always said in psychospiritual work, many people talk about it, psychospiritual work, very important, but just like you need a map of your own psychology when you do psychological work, having understanding of your ego, subpersonality parts, trauma parts, the shadow, inner child parts, anima, animus, all of this. When you do in spiritual work, you need to have understanding of the spiritual realms, spiritual forces affecting us, and what's coming through the porosity of your mind.
Yeah, and the reality is that you can't differentiate between something that's coming from within you versus what's coming from it outside of you if you don't know yourself. And then on top of it, the entry point is going to be through some sort of trauma. So that's why I find this whole kind of like calling everything demon conversation very fascinating, because unless you know yourself, how can you differentiate between what is actually a shadow part or a wounded part versus what is actually an entity coming from outside of you? So most people misunderstand spiritual warfare because they don't understand their own inner world. And I think the point that you're making, and I agree with you, is that archetypal evil is real, but without knowing the psyche, it becomes impossible to differentiate what could be coming from your own shadow, because split off shadow parts, split off subpersonalities do become very hostile, right? And they can appear as entities. Or recently I saw a woman saying, oh, I'm dealing with a sudden sickness because I started researching satanic ritual abuse. And I'm like, well, how do you know that sickness is coming from a demon, which she basically attributed it to, or versus your own suppressed emotions? Like, exactly. So this is the whole thing, is people jump to the assumption that it's some sort of outside influence, it's some sort of demon, without that differentiate, and they're externalizing everything, right? So in order to actually tell between what's a very wounded part and a demon, you have to know yourself and you have to have that psychic sensitivity. And a lot of people are calling their own wounded parts or their own suppressed emotions demons, and then some people also, internalize everything, and they think that there's nothing outside their own psyche, and there's no autonomous forces that can enter that are not part of you, right? So then you have the other side of the coin of this like flatland spirituality, which says it's all coming from within you, and everything is just a projection of your own psyche, which is also not accurate. There is other beings and forces which do not belong to your own psyche and which need not to be integrated. So this true discernment means you have to recognize what is yours, what is not yours, and that requires healing your trauma, understanding shadow, understanding different subpersonalities, understanding your projections, understanding all the ways that these kind of beings can come in through these unconscious openings, So there's this kind of false binary where some people say entities don't exist at all, or some people attribute everything to entities in their own inner world. And it's honestly, I find it a little frustrating to see this narrative sometimes, because there are people who, the thing that people have right, in the kind of Christian fundamentalist thing is, yes, demons are real, but how do you know that's a demon? We never actually challenge people when they say, oh, I'm under spiritual attack. It's like, well, how do you know that's actually spiritual attack? How did you actually make that distinction? And, just because people are so hungry to believe that demons are real because of the flatland spirituality that we're in, finally someone acknowledging it. It's like, yes, demonic attack is real, but we need to get to another level and be like, how do you discern versus what is an actual demonic attack versus what is actually coming from your own psyche? And I think that's this deeper work that honestly a lot of people don't want to do. Exactly. And that's also one of the reasons I created Mastering Spiritual Warfare, the 10-week program I'm offering again only this year. Which is all about, again, it's not about fear, paranoia, or seeing demons everywhere and like, oh my, they're hostile entities. It's more about intentions, a grounded spiritual training with a lot of tools, practices in discernment, protection, shadow integration, being able to differentiate between shadow aspects, entity interferences, and all that kind of stuff, right? But also then looking towards divine guidance, because they are true divine forces, spirit guides helping us, but they act according to divine law. They're not bailing us out, and we need to differentiate what is true guidance versus more deceptive guidance, right? And with everything that's happening now with the UFO disclosure and everything, this unveiling that's happening, it's very important to become more aware of this. You can check out more at the website masteringspiritualwarfare.com. The new round starts July 15th, and again, limited only to 40 people and by application only. And now in the second hour, we go deeper. We go more into the esoteric aspect. I tie this into the Yuga shift because Bibo Dev Mesra, whose work we featured in past episodes and articles we wrote with this time of transition we're in, this Epkairosis, talked also about the unveiling of the heaven of the gods, that we will, through this purification transitional phase, will become in contact more with spiritual beings that were always in contact with us. But again, understanding that we may be presented with a false hierarchy and imposter beings. And we'll definitely acknowledge divine forces, true positive forces, angelic beings, and talk about how they truly act and what this time of transition truly requires on an integral psycho-spiritual level during this time of transition. Again, if you're not a member yet, feel free to sign up at my website, veilofreality.com/membership. You get access now to over 170 episodes of the second hours with a lot of practical tools concerning the times we're in right now.
And thank you for listening. We'll be right back.